All right, hello and welcome to Tevora's webinar, Launching Zero Trust Security as the New Perimeter. My name is Matt Fullerton and I'm an account manager with Tevora. Today, however, we'll be hearing from Ben Dimmick, our Director of Security Consulting Services. If there are any questions, please use the questions function in GoToMeeting and we will address those at the end of the presentation. Before we begin, just a little background. Here at Tevora, we are a management consultancy focused entirely on information security, compliance, and enterprise risk management. We offer just a huge range of services from security assessments and penetration tests to solution selection and implementation. We can also help if there are any privacy frameworks that you need to align with, as we have a full privacy practice for all of the regional privacy regulations. We also support SOC 1 through 3, and we have a full healthcare practice providing HIPAA, HITRUST, and ISO services. Tevora is also certified by the PCI Council as both a qualified security assessor and as a PCI forensic investigator. We've been in business for over 16 years, and we work with companies of all sizes, all the way from startups to Fortune 500s. So that's just a little bit on who we are here at Tevora. Ben, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Matt. So my name is Ben Dimmick. I've been with Tevora for about 8 years now. I lead up what's called our solutions team, which is essentially our implementation arm at Tevora. So when it comes to the heavy engineering talent that we have and so on, that is definitely what falls into my team. So we deal with a lot of deep technical components, and that's what really inspired us to bring up the whole zero trust topic here and to dwell on that today. So just real quick in terms of what the agenda looks like overall. We're going to be focused on a few things. The biggest thing that really spurred this webinar on initially was the release of NIST special publication 800-207. So if you're not familiar with it, essentially it is a NIST publication that's completely about zero trust and has really helped us to put a lot of things into context in terms of zero trust. And I'll get into some of that here in just a moment. So I'd say one of the biggest benefits that this has brought to us has really been that it's allowed us to really solidify a lot of the terminology that's being used. You'll likely find as you start to look at zero trust that there's a lot here that is I wouldn't necessarily say new concepts, but a lot of things that are starting to get cleared up. One of the challenges of zero trust is that there's been so many vendors that have been discussing it for so long that everybody had a slightly different definition in terms of what it meant. So this has kind of helped us to solidify a lot of that. But as I mentioned, though, there's a lot of concepts here that I would say are going to be familiar to you. There's a lot of things here that are not necessarily totally new, but there has been a few new things that have showed up, and the way that they've presented it is pretty strong in terms of explaining what the process should look like overall. They've really changed some of the zero trust message, so to speak. So in the past, there's been, again, just so many vendors that have used the term zero trust, attached it to so many things. It's started to become similar to what's happened with the terms machine learning or AI driven, where it's just used so heavily that the actual verbiage behind it has started to slip away a lot. So this publication has given us a rallying point where we can then go back and unify those messages around zero trust together into something that's much more uniting and gives us a message to understand how these various vendors may fit into the space overall. So really the big question then is what is the new message that's coming from this publication? Well, it really comes down to a couple of things. It allows us to begin quantifying what makes up zero trust. And really, when it comes down to it, there are two main considerations that have to be taken into account with essentially everything that's out there. The first one is the network. Essentially, when it comes down to it, the perimeter has changed. It used to be perimeter security was a major focus, but that started to shift. And the other component to that is identity. which is also playing a fairly key role in terms of that whole shift away from the traditional perimeter. So let's dive into those just a little bit here. First one, from a identity perspective, identity is the new perimeter. This is something that we've been saying for years and years. I think the first time I discussed that during a talk I gave was about 4 years ago. But yeah, that's definitely been something that's been happening for quite a while now. And this is not a new message, but it is something that we're hearing more and more often now. Essentially, what's happened is that the perimeter has been dissolving for a long time between, for instance, the increased adoption of cloud-based services, as well as more sophisticated attacks that are designed around penetrating perimeter defenses, relying on the perimeter. The traditional network perimeter has become something that is no longer reasonable, and so as a result, we're starting to see that identity is becoming that forefront there. So what does that mean from in terms of zero trust? Well, essentially what it means is that we're going into this with the approach of ensuring authentication is occurring at all major components, and ensuring that it's happening frequently, as well as across several different spots here. Touching on the quote that you see there in the bottom left there. Essentially, we're looking at expanding authentication. So from a high level standpoint, the definition of zero trust is that no access to resources should be given to any user based solely on their position within the network. So for instance, if we're saying that someone is on our corporate network and therefore they should have access to these few things here, we should not do that anymore. We essentially need to walk away from that and take the approach instead of, even though they're on the network, we need to assume that we still need to go through the authentication and authorization components. So we're starting to see some of this expand though as well. For instance, another common adage has been to stop using passwords, or rather to ensure that passwords are augmented. So this has been another major focus behind this this publication, looking at things like device trusts, more extensive MFA applications. These types of things are another component that was definitely highlighted pretty heavily throughout the entire publication itself. Another thing that comes into this, especially with current events as they are, is a BYOD. I've had a lot of conversations with clients just in the last couple of weeks that are very heavily focused around how do we implement zero trust and how do we implement BYOD, and how do we get to a good state in both of those veins. And at first blush, it likely seems to most folks like BYOD and zero trust are at polar opposites. For instance, when we're looking at it and saying, I want to be able to trust the devices that are out here, but if we have devices on the network that simply don't belong to us, how can we possibly trust those devices? So that is something that was addressed throughout this publication though. The biggest component to this, and this is also something that's coming up a lot with so many folks on a work from home situation, but the biggest consideration here is really doing a risk-based analysis of what this looks like. So for instance, if you are in an organization that is heavily regulated, if you have to go through more than 3 or 4 compliance frameworks during a given year, there's a good chance you're going to struggle with BYOD. If not to say it's out of the picture, but it does create some new implications. It's something that definitely has to be strongly reviewed. If on the other hand, your company operates more like a startup, where there's a lot more flexibility, there's a lot more agility, and so on, then BYOD tends to be something that's much more easily embraced. And then we go about adopting the principles of zero trust, for instance, ensuring that we have strong authentication everywhere, and so on. using using other methods. So don't want to dwell on that for too long, but definitely something that's that is considered, as well as something that is addressed. If that's something that's of particular interest to you, probably makes sense for us to have a sidebar discussion around it, because this could be a webinar all to itself. One of the other things that came up pretty strongly in this publication, though, is that the ICAM standard. This is the federal government's identity access management standard, known as ICAM, and it essentially has five different spheres to it. But another thing that came out of this is that this publication is that organizations that are struggling with adopting a strong identity program, like those identified within ICAM, are going to have challenges with being able to adopt zero trust in a secure manner. And part of the reason for that, again, is because authentication is such a key component to zero trust itself. So with that, let's talk about the other significant component to zero trust. Now that we've gotten through identity, let's talk a little bit about networks. And one of the things we've seen from a lot of our clients, which is unfortunate, is with so many folks rushing into a work from home environment, we've also seen that getting VPN access has been kind of rushed, and that's what's triggered a lot of these zero trust discussions. Has been how do we ensure that we have a firm grasp on network security? Initially, the discussion was just let's get as many people access to resources as possible. Now it's more of a discussion of how do we go back and evaluate the access now and clean up some of this. So what we're seeing is that we have a number of clients that I've spoken with who essentially gave users VPN access, but they either don't have the same level of restriction on VPN as they did in the office, or else they simply don't have restrictions at all throughout the organization, simply because it takes more work to get to that point. So definitely something that we're seeing as a challenge for a lot of folks, and certainly something we want to get away from in a zero trust network. There's simply not a lot of opportunity to adopt zero trust if we don't have at least a certain level of network security. We're also starting to see with a lot of the work from home approaches that we need to adopt new remote access approaches. So a lot of our clients have been looking at this as a way to get away from VPN altogether, potentially going with a zero trust approach, implementing measures that allow you to expose systems to the internet that previously would have required VPN to get access to them. And there are some technologies that fall under the zero trust umbrella that are beginning to enable this. Again, when we have strong authentication in place, and we have robust network security at the same front, it does open up some possibilities here. Yes, there's probably a lot of CISOs that see this as I'm increasing my risk as opposed to decreasing it. And when that happens, certainly it makes sense to continue with the current approach. And in a lot of cases, we're just adding another layer onto it. So for instance, we don't necessarily have to expose everything to the internet in order to adopt zero trust. We could instead say, first we get on the VPN, we authenticate there, then we have these other controls that are in place once we are on the VPN, and once our users are being properly coached from there, or properly controlled and evaluated from that direction. But it does open up a lot of new options here. We've also seen a lot of folks adopting cloud-based approaches here in order to facilitate remote access. That makes perfect sense. These are services that are designed to be exposed to the internet. But again, as long as we're using identity as our perimeter there, with things like a single sign-on and an MFA and so on, then that has been a pretty strong approach we've seen too. And again, even in environments where there's a heavy adoption of exposed services that are using strong authentication mechanisms or cloud-based services and so on, we're still seeing that almost all organizations still have some type of VPN presence, even if it's limited to just the core IT team or something else along those lines. We're still seeing that those exist. Another very, very common approach that we're seeing is VDI. I would say that we've seen a massive resurgence of VDI over the last several months. More people adopting it, taking it as the approach. This is really one of the strongest ways to embrace a BYOD approach, because essentially you don't have to worry about the endpoint. The endpoint doesn't get access to data other than to display it. The endpoint doesn't get any access to network systems itself. It's just a conduit for the users. The downside to this, where this is becoming a significant hurdle for a lot of organizations, is that VDI does have a pretty significant infrastructure cost associated to it. Essentially, you're taking all the resources that were dedicated previously to desktops and that sort of thing, and you're now having to invest those into servers. So if you are not positioned to do a major desktop refresh anyways, then this essentially gives you a whole nother function where systems and services have to be purchased, and can be fairly expensive in that sense. But one of the biggest things in terms of securing zero trust networks, once we're starting to go in this direction, is really getting micro segmentation into place. So the goal behind micro segmentation, and again behind zero trust, is that we shouldn't be able to have any privileged level of access based on where we reside within the network. So it's pretty standard fare to get access to a system in the network, pivot in the east-west direction to another equivalent system, and continue to move through in that direction until the attacker can gain access to more privileged systems that allows them to then begin to function in an equivalent way, such as an attacker may compromise the secretary's computer or a receptionist's computer or something else along those lines, which they then move to gain access to another user's computer, eventually getting access to a domain admin's computer, which they use now to take domain admin credentials and compromise a domain controller itself. So this is really what we want to move towards. It's more of a micro segmentation approach to ensure that those positions within the network are not providing any additional privileged levels of access than we've had otherwise. So, for instance, I guess I'd say a bad, better, best scenario. Bad would be having an extremely flat network where there's very little control or segmentation between various segments. A better approach is, yes, we have a lot of segments. We have these various choke points where we're controlling access and ensuring that we have ACLs in place and so on. And then the better approach would be actually implementing microsegmentation. For instance, stopping that east-west movement, stopping once someone gets access to one server, being able to pivot to another server in the same subnet, and things like that. One more major consideration on the zero trust network side of things is looking at resiliency. So this was another thing that the NIST publication pointed out pretty stringently, was with some potentially major network changes, looking at how these things will impact the environment overall, which is definitely something to consider. And there's no simple answer for this. When it comes down to it, a zero trust architecture can actually increase resiliency for a number of reasons. Number one, a lot of zero trust strategies center largely around the cloud, which is obviously going to rely pretty heavily on your WAN links, but it also does remove some of the single points of failure that might exist otherwise for an organization. So the point here is just to make sure that's something that's being considered throughout the process overall. Now, in order to get to a state where we have some strong controls in place, we really have to begin looking at contextual access. So this is, and you're going to notice there's a couple of themes here that we're going back to over and over again. One of them is being able to evaluate based on risk. So that's definitely a major component here, and the reason why contextual access comes up. One of the core tenets that's established behind this publication is looking very heavily at the risk-based policy approach to things. So, for instance, if this user connects to our system and they happen to be using a trusted device. So for instance, they have our certificate in place, we know the system, our company owns this system, so on and so forth, then we will let them connect without requiring MFA. Or we will let them connect outside of normal business hours, because there's a greater chance that this is a legitimate connection. Or even we will let them connect from these regions of the world that we trust less, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the first things to this, and this is where a lot of companies get bogged out a little bit at first, is getting a device trust approach into place. There's lots of companies out there that are essentially offering what they call a zero trust solution, and it will just do device trust, or it will just do microsegmentation. But yeah, that's where a lot of these types of topics are starting to come up initially, is just around device trust, and this can be a powerful tool, but it doesn't necessarily have to be required. One of the things that came up in the publication is device posture. So for instance, and some of this may go back to adopting a BYOD approach, but for instance, is the system have all of its patches applied? Does the system have our requisite antivirus installed, and so on and so forth? These types of evaluations are also something that should be considered while doing device trust, and which is not to say that if you're not considering these things, you're not doing zero trust, or to say that these things should be major considerations. But these are definitely factors that could be considered potentially as part of the risk evaluation during different authentication points within the environment. And then one of the last things is again, hopefully this has been driven home, but risk-based authentication is one of the most crucial components to being successful with zero trust. A lot of companies balk initially at the idea of MFA. Risk-based authentication, the idea behind it is, let's evaluate your current circumstance, decide where we feel the risk of your focus really is, and then we will apply access based on around that. So for instance, if we know that this user is connecting from their home, where they've connected every day for the last 3 months or so, chances are this is probably an authorized user. Therefore, we can lower what our requirements are, as opposed to this is they're coming from a new IP, and they're not coming from a trusted device. Therefore, we really want to raise this one. We want to throw off some new MFA requests and that sort of thing. So companies that are having challenges with MFA and be able to adopt it widely, this may be the approach you want to take. Instead of requiring MFA for every single authentication, maybe it's a matter of, if you're coming from a source that we know, you're coming from a computer that we have device trust for, we will go ahead and allow you to skip the MFA step, or the password step, or what have you, so that you can get access more quickly, because there's not a lot of risk associated with what you have going on right now. So that said, now that we've established some of the components to zero trust, let's dive into what makes zero trust work. So I want to talk a little bit about the maturity curve and where these things are going here. Essentially, we're looking at 5 different phases, and I would say that there's not many organizations that fit squarely into one of these phases. These just kind of give an idea in terms of where you're at right now, and where we want to head. So, for instance, this first phase, we're calling it perimeter security. You may have a largely flat network. You're relying heavily on your firewalls and your network IPS devices to control things. There's really not much in terms of security once you get inside. The NIST compares this to getting through a TSA airport security. Once you've gotten through that checkpoint, there's no more checks going on. You're allowed to freely roam, and that's essentially what we're at with this phase 1 approach. Getting to the next step, we got to what we started calling multi-perimeter security. So This isn't necessarily largely different. In this case, you now have centralized identity. You probably have your servers and their own subnets. So you at least have one more layer of security, but essentially you're just imposing additional checkpoints into your existing network. So this might be going back to our airport example. Maybe as you move from one terminal to another, you have to go through TSA again, and they go back and check your ticket and make sure you actually are you say you are, and that sort of thing. So while this does provide more security, it does provide it in a fairly limited capacity. Moving on from there, this is where we get to what we started calling role-based security. So in the previous one, we started segmenting our servers. For instance, maybe an n-tier architecture, maybe you've got your DMZ separated. Now we're starting to get to the point where our users are starting to get segmented. Instead of, for instance, you're just in a subnet based on whichever floor of the building you happen to work in, or something else along those lines. Instead, it's you're in the IT VLAN, or you're in the HR VLAN, and so on and so forth. We also are beginning to incorporate role-based access controls things. So there's a maturity on the network side as well as a maturity on the identity front here. So for instance, in our previous example, we're starting to put up some roadblocks between terminals. Now we're actually starting to look at it and say, for instance, okay, why are you trying to go to terminal C when your flight is in terminal D? And we're starting to be able to deny users based on those criteria, and really get a lot stronger grasp on what's happening with our identity overall. The next phase we're diving into. Oh, and I forgot to mention this previously. Again, if you have questions, feel free to throw them into the question section inside of the webinar, and I'll address them as we go, or else I'll be able to address them more towards the end. So, and now that we're going more towards in phase 4, we're moving to a heavily sanctioned approach. So at this approach now, we're starting to actually implement micro segmentation, and we're starting to introduce a risk-based identity. So we'll begin to actually have some real segmentation for users and access along the way. For instance, now you wouldn't be able to get to any gate besides the gate that you're supposed to get to in our airport security approach, or even TSA is at the gate of each airline or each airplane to control and to monitor your access, make sure nothing has happened after you've gotten through security and so on. So definitely getting in a stronger direction. And then when we reached phase 5, that's really what we're calling the zero trust phase. This is when you're in a situation where you now have active session tracking control. You can quickly validate what's going on with users. You can do risk-based evaluation of sessions on the fly, such as this user is connected to the system. They do that, but they're doing some things they don't normally do. Therefore, let's stop and check what's going on. This might be, for instance, now that they've gotten on the airplane, they're acting suspicious. Therefore, let's stop and check them out and make sure that they are actually legitimate, and that everything that's going on is on the up and up. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over for questions. Matt, were there any questions we want to cover?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I'm talking on mute here. Yes, one question did come in from the audience. Where do you see most organizations falling on the maturity curve?
Sure. So most organizations, I would say, are somewhere somewhere around phase 2 or phase 3. Most organizations have gotten to the point just organically, without having a definitive zero trust strategy, to the position of phase 2. Some of the ones that are a little bit more mature have now moved on to phase 3. The most advanced ones are generally on phase 4, and most are not quite to phase 5 yet. So I'd say somewhere around phase 2 or phase 3 at this point.
Okay, great, wonderful. I think that's everything from the audience right now. And by the way, just to let everyone here know, the webinar is being recorded. So if there's someone on your team that you would like to share it with, just let us know and we'll be happy to send over a link. Now I want to take a moment and invite you all to Tevora's upcoming webinar series. We're going to be hosting a couple exciting webinars in the coming weeks. So please be on the lookout for these invitations in your email. Thank you all again for taking the time to join us and for the great questions. If there are any additional questions, or if you'd like to learn more about Zero Trust Security, don't hesitate to reach out to us here at Tevora. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.